Can I trouble you to stand up at the mic and just say like a test so we can make sure it's coming through all right? Okay, that's not on yet. Give it a little flip in there. Yeah, just slide it. There should be something a little here. Very bottom of it. Bottom, yeah. Great.
And you want to use this?
It's not so much for them, and if it turns out that, do you prefer to speak with that?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Probably for here, I'd rather speak.
That's fine. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
We'll see if there's a crack. Some folks are hearing you without the mics will use it, but otherwise. Yeah. Yeah. Any objection if I let people come in and sit down and wait?
Whatever you want to do, tell me when to start talking now. Oh, wait, how long? This is advertising how long?
45-minute presentation.
As long as you do it. As long as people want to.
Okay, I don't want to go. We started. Oh, your dinner.
I'll be after.
Okay, sure. Okay. See you.
Thank you. This is HIR, this building?
HIR, Hebrew Institute of Riverdale.
And the buy.
Is our nickname.
Oh, I thought it was two shows.
Nope, we are one.
Ah, so this is not a collaborative. Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. I was going to think both of them. Multiple rabbis.
Yes. We'll have to leave it, if it's okay to leave it on, because if in the end people say we can't hear, then we're going to let you use it, so let's use it active. Table original sound. Okay. And Brian, just thinking, let's bring.
not happening. There's an echo. What do you think?
I think she is.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It's like I'm saying, you know. This is recording. I know them from DC. Yeah. I haven't seen it in a couple years. Like we're friends on Facebook. That was fun. I remember. Was that George? Yeah. I remember they came to show me this week. It was like, this is right there. It's good. Yeah. On vacation. Remember how we was on the mall? That's probably.
I guess you're in touch with Jake.
Yeah. So he was I was going down, so I picked him up and went to the door. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's all affected. It takes my attention.
good that you're speaking here.
I've been seeing you since Junior Schreiber.
Yeah.
What was that? So it was like a different one.
7 months.
So long. Girl, what?
Well, just
I appreciate it. Since you're that stable to me.
do you need a place?
No, so that,
Okay, so you're good.
I stayed at Tina.
Oh, that's awesome.
On Wall Street.
Oh, yeah. That's like on the other side.
Oh, you're on the other side.
I'm on the other side.
Of course.
They call it the other side.
Yeah, the other side.
Yeah.
Coming out.
They so excited to see you, A.
Big pictures.
Yeah, I'm waiting for agency to like give me the make all the I'm just
You're gonna work
waiting.
for the same job?
I guess so. I mean, I'm just benefits, but a lot of stuff. If not, I don't care.
You know we're gonna.
It's not a mistake. You don't
I didn't say it was a mistake. It was a values gesture.
everybody do.
I didn't say it.
I don't know. I'm gonna
No, there's a good religious.
see. Okay, we'll talk later.
You went back to the mic?
Jake.
Okay.
Hi. Oh. Hello.
Remember me?
Rabbi Bill Reed.
Remember you? How are
From
you?
Summer Camp. Yeah, absolutely.
How are you doing?
Good. Good. I saw them. I was sharing for something. Yeah. My dad's retired in the process.
Step lightly, friends. I don't want anyone to trip.
Mother, she well?
Yeah, she's still working. She runs the school at the Reform Temple in Franklin, Mass. Live up here.
I was here when I was on Yavnel, that's how I was there for 2 months. I did, 2 years.
Ah.
From here.
The track leg? Yeah. Yeah, that might be good. I agree. I agree.
Yeah. Where you live?
I live in Jerusalem.
Ben Hazai. Near Nitzan.
on vacation. Good to see pictures. Yeah.
Hello everybody, thank you so much for being here and welcome to those here on Zoom as well. The mic is not always easily heard on Zoom, so thanks for bearing with us. We'll do the best we can. This week I've been carrying Rachel Goldberg Poland's words from the rally last Sunday, when she stood in front of thousands and thousands of people and said, "I so desperately want to talk to you about Pesach, about rebirth and renewal and redemption, but I feel too broken and too pained to do that." We're in the month of Nisan, the month of springtime and redemption. In my lifetime, we have not needed redemption ever more than we do now. For our hostages to return home to their families, for the threat of Hamas to be vanquished, for the tens of thousands of displaced Israelis to be able to return home, for Israel to be liberated from the rapidly expanding threat of Iran and its proxies, for our sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, and cousins to be free from having to wage war with all that comes in its wake. But it feels far from that vision right now. Where are we now? How did we get here? And where might we go from here? Alongside our tefillot, our heartfelt prayers, our dollars, our volunteer efforts, our advocacy, one of the things we try to do in this time is to get reputable information and clear-eyed, clear-headed analysis. For many of us, since long before October 7th, but especially since, the Times of Israel has been one of those places, and Lazar Berman has been one of those sources. I listen to the Times of Israel daily briefing just about every day, and I hear your voice. We could read dozens and dozens of articles of coverage that the Times of Israel puts out on a daily basis. So I thank those who reached out to connect us to Lazar on his trip. We jumped at the opportunity as a community to welcome him. He has lots of personal connections to this community, as I saw him greet a summer camp rabbi in this room and found out today that one of our rabbinic interns, Dr. Susan Ornstein, was your mom's chavruta in Providence and knew you as a little kid. But to the adult, Lazar Berman is the diplomatic correspondent for the Times of Israel, where he covers the war in Gaza and Israel's ties with the world. He fought in the Gaza Strip in the Khan Yunis area as an officer in Division 98, and
And in peacetime, he flies abroad with senior Israeli officials, including the Prime Minister, to cover their meetings with world leaders. He holds an MA in Security Studies from Georgetown University. We're gathered here in the Valley. Our name means home because we want everyone to truly feel at home here, and I want to thank all our communal partners who made this night possible. Chabad of Riverdale, congregation at CSAIR, Conservative Synagogue out of Israel of Riverdale, Congregation Beth Aharon, Congregation Tehillah, the JCRC of New York, the Riverdale Jewish Center, SAR Academy, the Kehillah of Riverdale, and welcome to my colleague Rabtina Nyman, the Riverdale Minyan, the Riverdale Temple, the Riverdale Y, Shivat Chobevei Torah, and YOZ of North Riverdale and Yonkers. To open our hearts and our minds to this talk entitled 6 Months of War, an exclusive deep dive into the military and diplomatic effort to eliminate Hamas. With gratitude for all you've done as a Chayal and a journalist, let's welcome Lazar Berman.
Thank you, Rabbi Exler. Thank you, the HIR. I was going to thank HIR and the Vaya. I thought it was two separate organizations, but apparently it's one and the same. And thank you for all the partners who came together. I really wish we could be here in happier times. I wish I could be talking to you about, let's say, a new normalization deal, a new peace treaty between Israel and Saudi Arabia, some new Israeli technology. But if we're going to talk about October 7th, I think this is an apt time to do so. Just marked 6 months, or 6 months since I think all of our roles have changed. Certainly Israel has changed. I can certainly say I have changed. I'm sure many of you here have changed. It was a reminder that the horrors that we learned about in the past are things that we also have to deal with, and the next generation will have to deal with that as well. It's a reminder that there are tens of thousands of people right next door who spend all of their time and resources and energy trying to figure out better ways to kill us. And then there are hundreds of people, thousands, probably more around the world, in some very comfortable, wealthy countries who spend their time marching to make sure that it's harder for us to defend ourselves from that, and that political courage in the world amongst world leaders can be sometimes doesn't last that long or can be hard to find. Now I know that, as Rabbi Exler was saying, this is a community that's very well-educated, that you stay up to date on what's going on in Israel, that since October 7th you've been involved. I'm sure many of you know people that, that are in the army now, or have been in reserves, or perhaps hostages, or people who were killed on that day or in the fighting since then. So I think the best way to go about this, to make this valuable for you for coming here on a Thursday night, is to try to dig down into some of the deep military aspects of where the IDF was up to October 6th, and why the fighting has looked like it has after October 7th. Those are things I think you cannot get just from kind of watching the news, reading the newspaper. And I'll also try to give you my sense of where we stand diplomatically. Most of what I write about in normal times is the diplomatic aspect. So, as the rabbi said, I think 30 times in the last 3 years I've flown abroad with Prime Minister, President, Foreign Minister. With Bibi I've flown I think 5 times this year. We did Rome, London, Paris, Berlin, and then we had a week in September in New York. Now, Israel at the time, kind of remember the world as it was before October 7th. It seems kind of impossible to go back to that time. But the big things, as you know, that everyone was talking about in Israel, or at least when we talked about Israel, that's what we're talking about, especially those of us that are covering it, was the quote-unquote judicial reform. The social, religious tension that was tearing apart, I wouldn't say tearing apart the country, but putting stress on the unity of the country. And that certainly had an effect on the diplomacy of the country. When we go abroad and we hear foreign leaders talk about this seemingly internal issue of what the future of Israel's democracy was, certainly that was something that was talked about here in the White House. The big international issue at the time, or the diplomatic issue with Israel, was whether, it wasn't really whether, it was when there would be a peace agreement with the Saudis. It was almost seen as inevitable. We had the Abraham Accords, that was the big exciting thing 3 years before. The Abraham Accords were kind of in a doldrums, while the support was going down in all the countries, but they weren't going anywhere. And the big question was when the Saudi deal would happen. The Biden administration, at the beginning, they wouldn't even say the word Abraham Accords because it would give credit to the Trump administration, but then they started putting their full effort behind efforts to make that deal. In general, the United States at the time, before October 7th, they were part of the trend from both parties to move America away from the Middle East, focused on China. But for many reasons, as every administration figures out, America can't stay out of the Middle East. The Middle East has its way of pulling it back in, whether it's the Iran nuclear program, whether it's the whole pullout out of Afghanistan, and certainly October 7th. The country, I think I'm going to go back a little bit and talk about the long trend of the IDF leading up to October 7th, because a lot of people ask me, how could it be that we were taken by surprise? And there's some of the reasons for that are mistakes made in the lead up and on the day, but also kind of conceptual things that happened over the years. If we think about the IDF, usually the big victories, the famous victories come to mind, 1967, 56, 73. And those came about when there was Israel's classic security concept. Israeli leaders understood that it's a small country, that it relies on its reservists, that there's no way that Israel can militarily end the Arab-Israeli conflict. So the idea was to have very quick wars where Israel knows ahead of time, invested a lot in the intelligence services. Ideally, Israel would know, would be able to call up the reserves, would use its ground forces to maneuver into enemy territory, defeat the enemy armies. If it needed to, it would take land to be used as a bargaining chip. And that is and then it would be able to release its reservist homes after 6 days, in the best case, or 3 weeks, for a war. And that is the way the security concept was envisioned, and it worked until 1973. 1973, the Yom Kippur War, don't forget we celebrate the 50th anniversary on October 6th, and that was, we were talking about the surprise and the betrayal and the sense of failure by the security services the day before October 7th. But that was also a breaking point in the way Israeli society and the IDF saw itself. First of all, there was over 2,200 casualties, and Israel thought, we can't keep fighting this type of war. We can't fight casualty, heavy ground combat. There was a sense that our technological advantage wasn't coming into play on the ground, that the Egyptians or the Syrians were able to get Soviet technology, and they were able to, just with very simple missiles, be able to stop Israeli tanks. So the idea was we have to look for some other way to fight. Luckily for Israel, the U.S. was kind of facing those same questions after they had come back from Vietnam, focused back on Europe and understood that the Soviets would always have more tanks with them, and so they said, okay, what is our advantage? Technology. We are going to focus on precision, on intelligence, and on airstrikes, and that is the way we will deal with Soviet armored divisions moving into Europe. That was very applicable to Israel as well. Israel also has a technological advantage. Why not take advantage of that, and then we don't have to lead on the ground? And over the decades, you can see that Israel moved away from investment in ground forces. All the good stuff, all the good technology went to the intelligence services, went to the Air Force. And if you look at the IDF operations in the 1990s, there was 2 of them in Lebanon. Absolutely no ground maneuver, no ground forces were used. It was all done from the air. And if you look at, let's say, 2006, that war that we surprised ourselves by going to war against Hezbollah in Lebanon, Israel did everything it could to not use ground forces. Started from the air with these impressive strikes. When they understood that wasn't working, they would do these raids, pulling soldiers in and out. And only at the very end, as a last resort, when it was understood that things really weren't working, sent in a major air assault, the biggest air assault in Israel's history, dropped tens of thousands of troops into Lebanon, lost 30 soldiers, didn't really affect the terms of the ceasefire at all. Ground forces were seen as something to be avoided. If you also look at the fighting in the fights over the years in the Gaza Strip, you also see the same pattern. Now, you don't know the history of the Gaza Strip. In 2005, Israel pulls out in a disengagement, pulls out every soldier and every civilian, and then it fights a series of indecisive rounds of fighting against Hamas, at the end of which we always tell ourselves that Hamas is deterred. And they have learned their lesson. 2008, 2009, Operation Cast Lead. 2012, Pillar of Defense, absolutely no ground maneuver. 2014 was a big one, Protective Edge, in which the ground forces were used only as a defense. Once the tunnels were discovered going to Israel, they moved ground forces up about a kilometer in so they could deal with the tunnels. And then another series, which I can't even keep track of, I think 2018, 2019, Operation Black Belt, 21, Guardian of the Walls, 2022, I forget the name, 2023. It was, also forget the name, Sword and Arrow, I think. The point is, when I go through this long list, is clearly another side was not deterred. It was a story we were telling ourselves. We were clearly stuck in this concept that wasn't bringing about the appropriate response. And if in the classic days of Israeli ground maneuver, you could see that the enemies understood that they cannot succeed in their current strategy. So if in the War of Independence you have 7 Arab countries against us, in 6-Day War you have 5, in 1973 you're only left with 3, Egypt, Syria, and Iraq, and then Egypt drops out after that. It shows that our concept was working. It convinced the other side that they couldn't defeat us with what they were doing. You get to our rounds of fighting against Hamas and Hezbollah. You see the opposite. They understand that what they're doing is successful. They double down on it. They double down on the rockets. They double down on the tunnels. And they understand that they have a winning formula, and we keep telling ourselves, we keep lying to ourselves. Now, it's not only a theoretical matter. This had an actual impact on the way the IDF is structured. Every shekel that goes to one place is not going to go to another place. So if we think that we're not going to ever maneuver in the Gaza Strip, we're not going to take the Gaza Strip again, we're not going to invest our intelligence assets into trying to figure out what is going on in the heart of the Gaza Strip. The rockets matter, and tunnels going to Israel matter, but a tunnel that goes from the heart of Khan Yunis to the northern part of Khan Yunis doesn't matter to us, because we're never going to get there. Why invest resources in trying to figure out what the tunnel network is doing? It also affects the way the IDF was constructed. If we're never going to operate in the heart of Palestine, of Gaza City, we don't need the engineering, we don't need the tunnel troops in massive numbers to deal with this in a massive operation. We constructed ourselves, and I think somewhat reasonably, for the inevitable war in the north against Hezbollah, and of course to deal with the enemy that is Iran. I'll even go further, and this is something that you're not really going to read about elsewhere. The last time there was an operational plan to conquer the Gaza Strip was in 2014. The head of the Southern Command, Sami Turjaman, someone I know, someone I respect greatly, he had an operational plan called Selei Tam to take the Gaza Strip with ground forces. It was supposed to take 2 weeks, divide the Gaza Strip into 4 sections. Each section would be responsible for moving civilians to the beach area, and each of those 4 sections would give humanitarian aid in their own sector. What's very relevant also about that plan is that Gaza City and Rafah, or Fiah, were taken at the same time at the very beginning, which makes a lot of military sense. We'll talk about that right now in a little bit, because we're stuck right now with the question of what to do about Fiah. That plan was canceled in 2015, and for the next 9 years, there was no approved plan to take the Gaza Strip. It wasn't anything. So if we're talking about, when we get to talk about October 7th, the fighting, there was that 3-week period where there was no ground maneuver, ground troops didn't go into the Gaza Strip. It was because they were drawing up that plan, which didn't exist. Now, let's go let's talk a little bit about Hamas as well, because there's a question that Israelis wonder, and people ask me as well, what on earth were they thinking? Here's a couple words about Hamas. Hamas, founded in 1987 during the First Intifada. It's an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. The first terrorist attack they carry out is a kidnapping, appropriate. They killed 2 Israeli soldiers, drove directly from the Gaza Strip into Israel because there was no fence at the time. But in their early going, I believe it was 150 in the first 3 years, the vast majority of the people they killed were Palestinians. Palestinians that weren't living a properly religious life, or especially people who were accused of being collaborators. And who led this effort of catching, torturing, killing collaborators? Yahya Sinwar, currently the leader of Hamas in Gaza. Especially nasty person. There are families in Hebron who tell the IDF, when you catch him, bring him to us, because we've been waiting a long time to get back at him for what we did to our families. Again, these are Palestinians. He was in jail for about 20 years. He was released in 2011 during the Gilad Shalit deal. So that was one IDF soldier for 1,026 prisoners, many of whom were hardened terrorists. And what he learned then is that if you kidnap Israelis, they will pay. Again, 1 for 1,026. He also learned fluent Hebrew. He learned Israeli society very well. You can see some of the interviews with him. His Hebrew was quite good. Almost as good as mine, which is not good. He really learned Israeli society. He comes to power in 2017, and he's this messianic type figure. In 2021, this is only starting to just come out. You can find it on the site Memory that covered this, I think, this week. There was a conference that he called in Gaza, and the conference was about liberating Palestine. And it wasn't just a theoretical, talk or a theoretical dreaming. They actually assigned people to have different sectors to be governors of the newly liberated lands. They had a plan for what they were going to do with the Jews that were still there. People like me would be killed very quickly, but people who are more useful to society, like doctors, engineers, things like that, would be allowed to live and prop up this new Hamas state. It was a plan that he actually believed in. There was a Fatah member who was in Cairo now, he was in Gaza and ran away to Egypt, but he says that even though he was in Fatah, he was very respected. Hamas, after the conference, reached out to him and he said that he could run the Rehovot area, because that's where his family was from originally. He laughed at them, he said they're crazy, but it shows how messianic and what they believed. And I think that points a lot at what they were trying to do on October 7th. I think there's another two reasons. I mentioned the prisoner one, that he understood that there's no way to get out these prisoners without kidnapping Israelis. And also the issue that the Palestinian topic was not in headlines. People were thinking about, how is Israel going to integrate without this, without the Palestinians being part of the conversation. October 7th itself, I think you all know what happened, followed it either on the day, if you've seen the video, so I don't need to go into that, but I do want to highlight two failures. I think the biggest failure, if you read about it, and when you go home with this, you read about what happened at Nir Oz. It's a small, Nir Oz. It's one of the kibbutzim on the border. It's about 1.8 kilometers. It's not about it. It is 1.8 kilometers from the border. Small kibbutz, less than 400 people. I just have my notes here from what I've been able to gather over the weeks about the schedule of that day. But by the end, it'll shock you. Okay, so at 6:29, missiles start coming into Israel. The Gaza division at Re'im comes under attack at 6:43 a.m. And that's when the centralized command of what is going on in the whole Gaza area stops working. At 7:15, the kibbutz WhatsApp groups start waking up with, I think there's people on motorcycles in the kibbutz. I can hear people are knocking at my door. The Air Force gets involved. The first airstrikes were at 8:24. So 2 hours after, that's when you have drones starting to strike in Nahal Oz. That's noteworthy because Nahal Oz, they didn't strike the terrorists inside the kibbutzim. They struck terrorists who were fighting in the base Nahal Oz. So the initial attempt from the Air Force was to defend the bases before the kibbutzim. And that's a moral and operational question that people are asking now. It does make some sense because if the bases are, you have to protect the bases if you want the forces to know where to go, but that's certainly something that the kibbutznikim who talk to me are very feel betrayed by. 8:43, there's reports from Erez Crossing, this is in the north, Those are the first reports that come through the IDF radio about soldiers being kidnapped into Gaza. And only at 8:54 are there reports on the radio about terrorists inside of kibbutzim. 2 helicopters flew over kibbutz Nir Oz at 9:04 a.m. They certainly saw smoke coming up, but there was no report or any understanding that there was fighting going on in the kibbutz. 10:15, so we're talking almost 4 hours after the start of the attack, is the first time any army radio mentions the word kibbutz Nir Oz. Okay, so 4 hours before the army understands that there's fighting in this kibbutz. By 10:30 a.m., so 4 hours after the initial attack, the division in Reiv is able to start functioning again, start dividing up the sectors into the forces that are starting to come down south. And by 12:30, major reinforcements are already in Gaza, and the real fighting is going on in the kibbutzim. So that's 6 hours after the missiles start coming. By 1 p.m., the terrorists leave Nir Oz, and they go back to Gaza, and they didn't see a single IDF soldier. 2:15 p.m. is the first time IDF, well, it's actually police, two carfuls of Hamas soldiers show up, or policemen, and then it goes and Shayat to come, and the only thing they could do is either help families get out of homes or start laying down bodies. Not a single bullet was fired from an IDF weapon all October 7th in kibbutz Nir Oz. Which is crazy. I think if you're looking at the failure of October 7th, you have to look there. And I encourage you, Haaretz had some good coverage of this, and I think it'll back up my schedule as well. I think it'll go pretty hand in hand. And I'm sure there's been videos made about it. Ultimately, 117 people from the kibbutz were killed or kidnapped. Almost around a quarter of the kibbutz. Absolute failure. But it wasn't all a failure. I also talked to, let's say, Kibbutz Adumim. I was talking to someone who was on the security team there just on the way up. He was actually running a marathon, and he was trying to figure out, I think he was running the New York Marathon. That's his first marathon, so we're talking about that. But he was telling me that there was only 12 people in the kibbutz security team because the IDF had told them to bring down the numbers from 15. It didn't need to be so many, had limited the types of weapons they could have, had told them if you wanted to have a weapon in your house, it has to be locked up in a very expensive and secure way. So the weapons were inside, all in the Nishkiya, in a centralized location. They were able to keep the terrorists from actually coming into the kibbutz. Unfortunately, because the Nepalese and Thai workers lived kind of outside of the kibbutz area, a lot of them were killed or kidnapped. But there are, and the IDF got there much earlier. So there are places where the fighting was more successful, but I think Nir Oz was the big failure. And I encourage you to read about it to really understand the depths of the failure in some places. I mentioned the Israeli Air Force, both as the arm of the IDF that was most invested in, the most successful, say the best in the world, I would agree with that. But the question is, where were they, right? So even if the ground forces weren't getting to these kibbutzim, if you look on the security cameras, you see people wandering around, driving their bikes like they came in from Gaza and just taking stuff, and then walking back on foot, carrying, dragging hostages, dragging kids, old women. Where's the Air Force, right? That seems like the easiest thing. You're walking through an open field, there's no cover. Seems like a very easy mission for the Air Force to stop. The Air Force did everything it was told to do, or it was scheduled to do that day. Right? So there was 2 helicopters in the Southern Command whose job it was, if there's anything happens in the Gaza Strip, to be in the air within 30 minutes. They have to be present. They got there within 28 minutes. I don't know if anyone here is a pilot or has flown. It's very different if you're in the Air Force and the infantry. The Air Force has no ability to really understand what's going on the ground when they're just flying in. They need to have forward air controllers, observers on the ground. They tell them where to strike. The Air Force knows how to hit a target. They can hit, put it through a window, but they have to be told where to hit. If you're just flying over and you see smoke all over the place, you have no idea what the battle picture is, where the good guys are, where the bad guys are. They didn't really have targets, and they didn't really understand what to do. They fired some missiles fired their ammunition, and when those two helicopters had fired everything they had, they had to go back to base. It takes 2 hours, and they have to go back. Most of the Air Force that was on standby went north. The big expectation was that the fighting would come from the north. There was patrols going up the Mediterranean Sea, over Syria, Lebanon. There was also some on the Red Sea. But the F-16s that flew over the Gaza area, they didn't understand where to strike, and they basically went elsewhere, they went back. There have been a lot of IAF, Israeli Air Force conferences, closed conferences that I can't report on, but I know what went on there. They're asking themselves that question. Why weren't we relevant on October 7th? They say now, even if we didn't know where to strike, just fly 100 feet over the ground and you think there are terrorists, believe me, if an F-16 flies 100 feet over you, you're leaving. They could have done things like that. They also asked themselves, the infantry soldiers, picked up their gun or went to their base or just drove south and started fighting. That didn't really happen in the Air Force. It's a very centralized, very bureaucratic organization. Without orders, people just waited and they got orders, which came very late in the day. That's when they started operating. By the end of the day, they were operating. The Air Force killed about 900 terrorists that day, mostly in the evening, mostly people trying to get out of Gaza into Israel. But they certainly are asking themselves what morally and what organizationally is wrong in the IAF that meant that they weren't relevant on that day. Let's talk a little bit about the fighting and the way that the operation has looked like, and then we'll talk a bit about the diplomacy of it, and then we'll take questions. As I said, there was no plan for conquering the Gaza Strip that needed to be drawn up. The plan relied heavily on reserve soldiers. Leading up to October 7th, the reserves were basically the past. Even Kochavi, the previous chief of staff, his plan was to start closing units. Certainly the political leadership wanted to start closing reserve units. Why are we going to invest money into people that train once a year? They cost a lot of money, they complain, they don't listen that much, they're not in the best shape. We're trying to be a smaller, more professional army. Why do we need all these reservists? They don't need to train so much, let's start shutting down units. The fact that reservists showed up on October 7th, showed up, 150% of their numbers to their units, and fought for months without going home or going home once in a while. These are CEOs, these are fathers, husbands, sometimes even wives and mothers. That saved the reserve idea. Moving forward, that will certainly change the way the IDF is structured. The actual fighting started, said after the 3-week pause, with a massive operation into Gaza City. I mentioned that the 2014 plan had Rafah and Gaza City at the same time. I'm not sure. I asked Bibi in a press conference why he didn't approve Rafah and Gaza City at the same time. He seemed kind of surprised by the question. And now this week there are reports that he was asking the chief of staff that very question. So I'm telling myself he got the idea from me. The way that the IDF fought in the Gaza City operation is very different than it fought in Khan Yunis and different than the way it will fight in Rafah. In the beginning of the operation, the operation was massive, it was aggressive, and it was slow. First of all, there was an expectation that Hamas had built up defenses over 17 years. We didn't know how effective they would be. If I was going to give you hundreds of millions of dollars in 17 years to build defenses, you couldn't build defenses better than Gaza City. All the advantages that a modern Western army has are nullified when you go into a massive city like that. Right? You can't see as far. Usually armies can see further than terrorists. They can fire further than terrorists. When you're in a city, when you're on a small street, that all gets, it becomes much smaller units, and all your advantages get nullified. Even a building that Israel would take down becomes even a better defensive position. As I said, the intelligence wasn't there, not on the forces and not on the tunnels. The rate of advance was as fast as the bulldozers could go, because of mine and things like that. And there weren't that many bulldozers. As I said, the army was not built to do this operation. It was 4 divisions that did the Gaza operation. Divisions 15 to 20,000. This is the first time the commanders had commanded their divisions in war. It was the first time a full reservist division fought since 1982. And if you compare that to the way the Khan Yunis operation was fought, that was in Division 98, that was my division, very different. One division, Division 98, the DNA is different than the other divisions. It's this Special Forces Paratrooper Division. It's created to fight in the depths of Syria or Lebanon, that's where their fantasies are. Doesn't have any tanks, so it had to be given 2 tank brigades. And the initial plan was to focus on finding Sinwar and the senior leaders much quicker, try to find the hostages in kind of a much quicker boutique operation. Didn't really happen like that. It was much faster, much quicker than the North one, but because of the lack of intelligence, the lack of some of the equipment that you would have needed, they had to fight a little bit differently. But even so, it was much, much more targeted because of the intelligence that Israel was starting to pick up off the battlefield, starting to learn how to fight together with the different units. In this battlefield, it was much more targeted and much less quote-unquote aggressive. That operation is over. The past week, all the forces have been pulled out of Rafah. At the height of the fighting, there was 28 IDF brigades in the Gaza Strip. And today, as we talk, there's just one. Right? So when we talk about it, I say the war is over. The actual war part was over, and we've moved, for a couple months now, we've moved on to another stage. And the last question, of course, is Rafah. There's one brigade there. That brigade has been reinforced by the other fighters that have fled south. The belief is that Sinwar is there, that Def is there, that most of the hostages are there. This is a Hamas brigade. This is the one that was responsible for all the smuggling across the border. This is the brigade that carried out the Gilad Shalit kidnapping. But it's a brigade that hasn't fought the IDF face to face. And the question is if and when it will happen. A couple hours ago, I was told by someone in the Prime Minister's office, an Israeli official, the Prime Minister's office, that there has been no date set for the beginning of the evacuation process of the civilians, which is a prerequisite for this operation. Bibi said a couple of days ago that a date has been set, and then Gallant told the Americans that there is no date set. So I'm not sure what to do there, but there has been no date, at least for the civilian evacuation. I believe it will happen because the Defense Ministry put out a tender, which you can see online, for 40,000 tents for the Gaza Strip, which could house, say, 500,000 people. So it seems like they're really making moves to make this happen. Also, they have been absolutely consistent. Political leaders know their leaders that this is going to happen. The Biden administration would like it to happen as some sort of, cool special forces guys, 10 guys kick in a window, grab Sinwar, go back home, make a movie about it. It's not going to happen like that, even though it'll be even more targeted than the Khan Yunis operation, but it's also basic military math. There was one operation in Rafah during this war, which was that type of operation. It was the operation about a month and a half ago where they rescued the 2 hostages. That was absolutely a special forces operation, but it wasn't less aggressive because a force like that can't protect itself. The minute they were discovered and the whole neighborhood woke up and started shooting at them, to extract them, you needed all sorts of outside fire to secure them and get them out. And that's not precision fire, that's statistical fire, like artillery, to just make corridors so that they can get out. So the force that goes into Rafah has to be of a certain size to be able to operate in a targeted fashion, but it's certainly not going to be that special force thing that the Biden administration would want. Just a couple of words before we take questions about the diplomacy of this thing. Obviously, in the first couple of weeks, world leaders were coming to Israel, saying the right things, talking about Israel's right to defend itself. Certainly, President Biden was a very emotional speech, which was well received in Israel. But from the beginning, you could also hear that there was criticism, the concerns. He was pretty quickly, basically accusing Israel of war crimes. He said indiscriminate bombing, apartment bombing. I don't think that was real American policy. That was just kind of the way he talks about it. But the criticism from America started early on. You had Tony Blinken at a press conference I was at, talking about Israel dehumanizing Palestinians, which to me sounded kind of Holocaust language, but that was inappropriate. And obviously, I think you've followed in recent weeks, it's gotten to new heights. There was that video conference between Ron Derman, Safia Negbi, and Jake Sullivan, and that did not go well. The Americans were unimpressed by Israel's plans for the civilian evacuation of Rafah. There was the non-use of the veto at the UN, and there was a very tense call, 45-minute call, between Biden and Netanyahu. I guess that was the come to Jesus conversation that they were supposed to have. However, on Iran, it seems like there is much better coordination, and they seem to be working hand in hand there. A couple of words about our Arab neighbors. If the war ended today, we'd say, listen, we were able to preserve the Abraham Accords. None of the countries are have dropped out. Their ambassadors are not in Israel, but they are not planning on going anywhere. And I think we've done well in terms of that, in terms of maintaining that. Jordan and Egypt are very vocally critical of Israel. Heard that. However, there's good news here. The military-to-military relationships between the two countries, and the military is what is powerful in those countries, not the foreign ministry, has never been better. I'll give you a couple of examples. Jordan has had airdrops every day during Ramadan in Gaza. An airdrop doesn't just happen. King Abdullah can't just say, I want to do an airdrop and send planes. In order for that to happen, the Jordanian army has to coordinate with the Israeli army. They have to get permission. The Israeli army has to stop all air operations anywhere near where there's going to be Jordanian planes. There can't be any planes higher. No bombs could come in any trajectory that could possibly touch them. Meaning all the IDF operations are suspended so that those planes could fly through. And it means that the Jordanian pilots are speaking with Israel the entire time. They're speaking with Israeli ground controllers, other Israeli jets. They're in very close contact, and that means that they're doing that every day. The aid that's coming from Jordan, Israel is much more willing to let things go in without being checked if the Jordanian chief of staff says that it can go in. That's the depth of the trust. And you can also see evidence of what Jordan really thinks, or at least the rulers. There's been very bitter protests on the streets of Jordan, but they remain in Amman. From Amman to the Israeli border is about 20 kilometers. There's been not a single protest on Israel's border. That's not because the protesters don't want to get there, that's because the Jordanian army is not going to let them get there. We just finished the month of Ramadan. It was actually very quiet, and it was quiet on the Temple Mount, in large part because the Jordanians, who control the Waqf, made sure that the speeches up there were not, they were aggressive, but they weren't the worst, and they weren't that inflammatory, because they didn't want to see things get out of hand either. So the Jordanians in Israel, they might say what they want, the queen can say what she wants, but the coordination has never been better. Also Egypt. Anytime Israel strikes in Rafah, it tells the Egyptians ahead of time. In 2014, Egypt has a bunch of soldiers along the border. They're trying to make sure that Hamas or the Palestinians don't get in. In 2014, there was a strike, an Israeli strike in Rafah, and the bomb didn't detonate, and it skidded across the border into an Egyptian base. Thank God it didn't detonate. You can think how terrible it would be if Israel killed a bunch of Jordanian soldiers. It was terrible. Egypt had Israel come in and deactivate the bomb, but now anytime it strikes in Rafah, it lets the Egyptians know ahead of time, so it tells soldiers to go into bunkers. So it just gives you a sense of the tight coordination that goes on between these militaries, day in and day out. They're going to say what they're going to say, but believe me, these countries would like Israel to win quickly, and to get beyond this and get this issue out of the public street and be able to move on to something else. The Saudis, their worst enemy is Iran, there's no question. I don't think they're very close to normalization because they get what they want from Israel right now. They want intelligence, they want business. Sure, we give it to them, but there's no reason for them to really put themselves out there and risk being seen as collaborators in the West or whatever they're called anyway, by making it official. Europe is Europe, but the good thing about the EU is that the 27 members of the EU to do anything in the foreign policy field, it has to be consensus. So you have countries that are problematic. Spain, always a problem. Ireland, forget it. Yeah,
Norway too.
Norway's not the worst. Not the worst. Not the worst. Belgium is always bad. Malta, for some reason. Luxembourg also. Those are kind of the five that are always the big trouble for us. But we also have good friends of the EU. The Czechs, love them. The Czech ambassador in Israel, she wears Magen David. She wears the dog tags. Hungary, we go about Hungary, but in the EU they go to bat for us. Austria has been very supportive recently. Germany, obvious reasons, is also helpful. So any of those countries can hold things up, and they certainly put themselves out there for us. I just want to finish on one positive note before we ask questions, because I've said some things and I don't want to bring people down. If a war had broken out in the north on October 6th, the IDF would have been strong, would have been ready in some ways. But to compare that army, IDF, to where we are 6 months later, no comparison. We are so much more prepared, and the IDF is as strong as it has ever been. Is the strongest it has ever been today. You have your 18-year-old, 19-year-old soldier has 6 months of combat experience in the war. They have more combat experience than the chief of staff. The commanders have commanded their divisions or their brigades in war, which they hadn't done before. The techniques and the work between the Air Force and the ground forces is so accurate, close, and just the trust is there that it'll certainly pay dividends in the north. And in the fighting in the north, right, there's a real problem, because there's a question of how to get the 60,000 people who leave evacuated back to their homes. Serious problem. But as long as the fighting goes on like it is, we have every advantage. Hezbollah's advantage would be to take Israel by surprise like October 2nd, but they're not going to be able to do that anymore. They're not going to be taken by surprise. As long as it's intelligence and airstrikes, we have every advantage, and our intelligence is so much better in the north because we've been paying attention to it for the last 20 years. That's why you can see we know where the senior leaders are. We've killed 4 senior Iranian generals. We killed the Hamas leader in Beirut as well. Over 250 Hezbollah fighters. Most of their special forces are off the border. So as long as this goes on militarily, we have every advantage out there. The question is, how do we get the evacuees back? And that is one we haven't figured out. So I'm going to stop here, because I know you guys have to go on at some point, and I'll take questions. We can talk about hostages, war, anything like that. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for this enlightening talk. I'm wondering, what is the role of Qatar here? On the one hand, there's a U.S. base there. They have Hamas officials there, and yet they're the peacemakers. How can they really be sincere in their efforts to be peacemakers?
Sure. So
repeat the questions, please.
Please repeat the questions, we couldn't all hear
You
it.
want to come to the front, maybe?
Happily. The question was about Qatar, the small Gulf country that seems to be one of the two mediators. What are they all about? So first of all, it's kind of a paradox, because Israel has a long relationship with Qatar. They opened a trade office in Israel in the 1990s, and they didn't close it during the Second Intifada. They closed it in 2008, I believe, right, during the Gaza fighting. And Israel used Qatar to prop up the governance in Gaza, bring in money every month, suitcases of cash. And Israeli diplomats were in Qatar during the World Cup. So there is certainly deep relationship there. On the other hand, Qatar is ideologically aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood and with Turkey, and the Gulf countries that we do business with hate them. The Saudis hate them, the UAE hates them, they kicked them out of the GCC for a few years. The thing is, America, especially the Biden administration, really trusts them. It used Qatar to make a deal with the Taliban, to make that deal with Iran, where they released people, and they signed a deal, I think they called it a major non-NATO ally. So they propped up Qatar as one of the pillars of American policy in the Middle East. Also the biggest American base is there, right? Which is American moving, it would take a while, but it's central to the American policy. Qatar needs to come through as a mediator if it wants to maintain its position in the West, and it does want to. Israel has gotten fed up with Qatar, and it's no coincidence that the talks that are going on right now, or that are kind of stalled, are happening in Egypt. Because Israel says, we want Egypt, we see Egypt as more effective, we trust Egypt more, we want to do the talks here, we want to raise up Egypt's profile in the lower countries. I think that's correct. I think after the war, whatever that is, there has to be a long-term program or plan to lower Qatar's profile across the region. I think Israel really needs to do that in the halls of power in Washington. You can see a start of it in the fact that they might kick out Al Jazeera from Israel, which is a tool of the Qataris, and which will limit its ability in some ways to broadcast to the world and get the Arab Street angry at us. So hopefully there will be an understanding that we need to do that. Hopefully the US will join us on that, but I don't think this administration. That's a very good question. Yes?
Social and news media and news outlets seem to rely on statistics from the Hamas Department of Health uncritically. Can you comment or elaborate a little bit about sources of information in that organization in particular?
Yeah. There's no question that not only social media, by the way, during the State of the Union, President Biden used that number, right? Which is a big problem. The numbers are certainly imaginary. Right? If Hamas, there's no way during a war in an urban environment they know how many people are killed. Maybe you've seen there's been analyses of this, I think in Tablet magazine, that the numbers don't act like numbers, they go up in a linear fashion. They're certainly imaginary, and there's no way that Hamas can tell us we don't know how many hostages we have, but we know how many dead there are. I don't think they're that far off, right? We shouldn't treat them as that we know how many. It seems reasonable. Israel says, what, 12,000 Hamas have been killed. Let's say twice that many have been injured. That's also not a real, exact number, but it's a ballpark. If you double that, you get close to that. And a 1-to-1 ratio is pretty good. There's no way we can know. People just have to understand. We don't know how many are dead. Don't know how many civilians. Don't know how many terrorists. It's a lot. There's no question. But the numbers are irrelevant in terms of the law of this. Right? It's about the intent of the people attacking and the decisions they make. But people don't know international law, and they certainly apply differently when it comes to Israel. But there's certainly no way that the health ministry in Gaza knows those numbers. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. When the ground maneuver started, Hamas had 24 battalions, and 18 were dismantled, which means Rafah has 4. And I understand that in case of Rafah, because of Palestinians over there and US pressure, the Israelis didn't dismantle them, didn't go into Rafah yet. But what about the 2 battalions that are in the center? Why didn't we go after them?
So a couple of things about that. When it says that they are dismantled, what does that mean? It means about 70% of the combat power has been killed, wiped out, run away. But the minute the IDF pulls out of an area, Hamas is back. Okay? How do they do that? They have observers. When they understand that the IDF has left, they come in, they start reasserting themselves civilly. So you see people walking around with clubs, covering their faces, showing that we're back, and that could be that day. And then with time, then they'll start walking around with weapons. When Israel was able to, they strike those people as well. But I'm sure Hamas is back in Khan Yunis, so just because we've busted apart a unit doesn't mean that Hamas isn't there. Why haven't they gone to the 2 in El Bureij? They will. I don't think. They're not.
There was no particular obstacle. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, but they're not really. It's a sideshow. Okay. You know what I mean? The ones in Rafah are important because they're on. That's where most of the civilians are. They're on the border. That's a decent brigade. El Bureij, it's
Let's do one more thing.
Yes.
I read that Indonesia may normalize relations with Israel if Israel lets them get into the OECD.
Yeah.
Is there anything to that?
I read the same thing. I've been traveling today, but listen, it's one of the countries that has been talked about as
the most populous Muslim country.
Yeah, it's been talked about as a possibility for years. Indonesia also did an airdrop, right? If it did airdrop, that means there's some really tight coordination. So you put those two together, it seems reasonable. I've made the correspondence to corroborate that. It seems reasonable. On this side. Yes, ma'am.
Over here, if
Okay.
Okay.
If Israel starts to move the Palestinians out of Rafah, how does Israel know how many of them are Palestinians who still favor Hamas anyway? And how does Israel know how many of the Hamas leaders or fighters or whatever are not going to move with them, since they seem divided among them?
Sure.
So how do you kind of get rid of them?
So in terms of favoring Hamas, there's nothing Israel can do about that. It's not within our power to decide who they support or not. They're civilians, they're protected by law. They'll move and they'll support Hamas from the center of the Gaza Strip. The question is long term, is that a problem? Yeah. But that's not the main problem we're facing now. It's still a military problem. Whether Hamas leaders will move with them, not leaders but fighters, I'm sure. Anywhere a civilian goes, Hamas is there. If they go, there's two what's called nakazim in the Gaza Strip right now, which is these points where the Palestinians want to move from north to south. They have to go through these, call them a checkpoint, with cameras. The Shin Bet is there. There's a lot of AI that can identify faces. So if they go through there, then they'll have an easier time to pull out the Hamas fighters. And those are places where Hamas fighters, and when they want to give up, they'll go to these places. They know they'll be caught. It's an easy way to get out. Hamas, in its demands in Egypt, are saying we want IDF forces to pull up to Nakazim and let unfettered access on Rashid Road and Salatin Road, moving north and south, so that they won't be caught. But there's no question that Hamas fighters will move with the civilians. It's not the worst thing if some of them move to the center. It makes it easier to take Rafah, and then it's a question of running after them in the future. It's really not the worst thing.
over here.
Understand the reasons behind initial technical surveillance games. We didn't want many people that it was a surprise attack. So more specifically, why was the security videos from the security barrier not monitored 24 hours a day as supposed to? What happened to aerial surveillance? What happened to data surveillance that Lazar misinterpreted? Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yep, I think in general, if you want a big picture, it'll be an over-reliance on those type of things, right? So an over-reliance on technology, just because you have technological assets in place, doesn't obviate the need to have the forces on the ground when that goes wrong. There's a principle in the military that the enemy will get through the first defensive line. There's not a principle that they'll get through 30 different places, but they over-reliance on technology. They were also very, very good at knocking that out in the first act, from drones and things like that. And once they attacked Re'im and Urim and the bases there really wasn't anyone that was focused on managing the battle until 3 or 4 hours later. So I think when you add up the conceptual problems, the over-reliance on technology, the idea that Hamas is never really going to try anything like this on a major scale anyway, you add it up and you get the worst case scenario. Yeah.
Come this January, whether there's a Biden administration or a Trump administration, what's the advantage or disadvantage to Israel?
Good question. I want to get to...
I didn't ask you who you voted for.
Yeah. What are the advantages of a Biden administration versus a Trump administration for Israel? The Biden, I'd say what the Bibi administration thinks right now is certainly that the Biden administration is lost. There was a decision made about a month ago. You see, Netanyahu has been much more aggressive in responding to the Biden administration publicly. And then they think, all right, he wants to get reelected. He's going to use us for that. The advantage of the Biden administration is it's easier to come to a Saudi deal because the Republicans would vote for that because of their support for Israel, and the Democrats would go along with it. But if it was flipped, the Democrats really don't like Saudi Arabia anyway, and why would they want to start giving them all these defense things when they killed Jamal Khashoggi and all sorts of other human rights abuses? And they don't necessarily want to put their necks on the line, especially if Netanyahu stays in power, right? Netanyahu stays in power, and there's no reason for him to go to elections right now. If you have another 4 years of Biden and Netanyahu going at it, it's probably not great for the relationship. With Trump, the benefit is that he likes to do things that the opposite of what Biden did. So he'll say Biden abandoned Israel, and I'm going to do the opposite. And he has a kind of good and evil, black and white sort of mindset, and this kind of fits into it. The problem is he has a lot of isolationist people around him, and that could get in the way of some weapon supplies, though the Republican Party in general, I think, could balance that. Certainly the Netanyahu people are waiting for Trump to come back. It's the sense I get when I talk to them all the time. Yes, ma'am?
Yeah. Why have we been lied to? Because, like, in the beginning of the war, you heard the press say that, well, the Palestinians, they don't have any food, lie. They don't have any water, lie. They don't have any power, lie. They don't want to report on the hate, how much they hate this country. Like you just had in Michigan, people saying death to America. They say that at their rallies, and yet we're not being told that. I mean, you just have like Nagler and Schumer and Goldman, and they're like, you have to support the Palestinians. Like, why? When they hate you. And yet we're not being told any of this hate. We're not being told, they're saying, oh, the children, and it's like, well, if you flip them as shoes, what are you expecting? And yet, you don't see them do this. Like right now, Russia and Ukraine are at a war, and you don't see any of this. You don't see people demanding to Russia, oh, you have to protect the innocent Ukrainians. You don't see people demanding of Russia, oh, you have to make sure the Ukrainians have food, have water, have power. Why?
Questions understood. I said it's a problem we know we've dealt with. I just don't think I don't think we've made our lives any easier. There's a really, we ask ourselves, why is our PR so bad, right? I think, Elon Levy, the British spokesman? So we spoke to him, he's a friend of mine, we spoke to him after he was fired, and you see the chaos within the public relations in the Prime Minister's office. Turns out he never spoke to Netanyahu once. He never signed anything, so he was never he's not sure he was ever officially a spokesman. And then he only found out he was suspended from the news, so he kind of thinks he was fired from a position he never had. And he was the best one they had, and then you had me saying that we don't have any spokespeople that can put two English words together, and he was wonderful, Oxford, Cambridge. And then he was gone with the sergeant major. So I think given the realities that you described, I think we didn't make our lives very much easier, and I think they could certainly do better on that front, even though it's never going to be 100%, it's probably never going to be 50%. We can certainly do better. Yes?
In 1979, Israel signed a peace treaty with Egypt. In 1993, Israel signed a peace treaty with the PLO. Rabin and Arafat shook hands. And that was subsequent to the Oslo Agreement. I believe in 1996, 1997, Israel signed a peace treaty with Jordan. Okay, let me lie.
94.
Jordan?
94.
94? Yeah. Rabin was assassinated in 1996 or 1997, and the Prime Minister who replaced him, not Shimon Peres, said he will not honor the Oslo agreements. My question, in light of this massacre on October 7, and also since there are 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, 2 million Palestinians in Israel, 2 million Palestinians in the West Bank, and 6 million in Jordan, here, what is the future for Israel here? And how this is going to be solved?
So in terms of the next 5 to 10 years, I don't think the problem is that there's certain numbers of Palestinians. I think the demographic issue is not the problem. In the next 5 to 10 years, we should expect to see continuing fighting in the Gaza Strip, just like we have in the West Bank. I think the Gaza Strip, the best case scenario turns into the West Bank. Not in terms of that there's Jews living there, but in the West Bank you have a weak Palestinian authority. They can't even control Jenin, right? But much less the West Bank or Gaza, but they exist. They exist because the IDF is there. The IDF goes where it wants and operates. Hamas exists, but is not able to do anything beyond individual small terrorist attacks. That's probably where we're going to move in the next 5 to 10 years. There's been talk about, there needs to be an over-the-horizon talk for a Palestinian state. It's incredible how little, there was no appetite for that after the Second Intifada. There's even less of an appetite for it now. It's not only the right wing, I know here they like to say it's Netanyahu's getting in the way of that. You had President Herzog, not a right-winger, head of the Labour Party, seen as a very reasonable person. When he was in Davos, he said on stage that no Israeli in his right mind is thinking of the Palestinian state right now. I think that's accurate, right? It might frustrate some people. I think that's the way. Even if you go to the merits left, they're not calling for a Palestinian statement right now. So in terms of any sort of final status, I don't think we're going to be there. The best case scenario, I think, is where you have a reasonable Palestinian authority in the Gaza Strip. Abbas is in a retirement home somewhere. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt are pouring a lot of money into the Gaza Strip. The IDF goes where it wants. I think that's the best scenario we have in the next 5 to 10 years. Yes, sir.
Please, a more personal question.
Yes.
You are a correspondent, a Christian correspondent, Christian affairs for the Times.
Yeah, I'm Jew.
What
Yes.
does that entail?
What is Christian? Okay, that's it. Thank you for asking that. It's something that I asked for. I think if you look at now, especially if you complain about the fact, not complaining, but identifying the fact that our status in the world has been undermined. Christian organizations do wonderful things in the world. I was on the train here, I was sitting next to a woman, and she saw I was like typing stuff about Israel. She started talking about it, and I thought, okay, here we go. And she says, we're worried about you guys, we support you guys. It came from a Christian place. There's an organization called International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. They're doing the best Hasbara that Israel could ever ask for. Rallies, telethons, all sorts of stuff. We don't see it because we just don't see that world. But they're also our best diplomats. Papua New Guinea and Fiji are talking about moving their embassies to Israel because the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, which is this independent Christian organization, sent people there and turned them into Christian Zionists. It's incredible. On the other side of that, it's also an important religious, diplomatic issue. The Catholic Church, massive, powerful organization. It's an organization that a lot of countries, like France, their relations with Israel, are always have to do with that. It's an issue that Israel doesn't understand as a diplomatic, as a domestic issue. The Christian leaders I talk to say that we don't really have address. Do we talk to the foreign ministry? Do we talk to the interior ministry? Do we talk to the Jerusalem municipality? Do we talk to the police? And they have all sorts of issues, whether it's people spitting on priests, whether it's we want more land because the Armenians, right? They want to move out of the Armenian part. They're young, they want to get married. If they marry an Armenian woman, can she come and be a citizen? Also, those are very important issues. And they're not issues that are sufficiently covered, so that's why I thought it would be important.
Do you actually reach out and see the foreign Christian organizations and encourage them towards,
Not on this tour. No, perhaps I should. We had that?
Just about. I'm going to take the liberty to ask you to touch on 2 final topics, however you wish to. One is the status of the hostages and hostage negotiations, whatever you can share there. And 2, of course, so much discussion in the last number of weeks has been on the humanitarian aid.
Yeah.
What's the status and what can you share with us?
Sure. The hostages, obviously, the more you think about it, the worse it gets. But I'll just give you what I understand to be the situation now. 129 hostages still in the Gaza Strip. The IDF has told 34 families that their family members and loved ones are not alive of the 129. If they're going to tell those families, that means they have all the evidence that they need, and there's no question. The New York Times reported about 2 months ago that the belief is that there's probably twice that number that are dead. And Israeli officials say privately that they also believe that many more are dead as well. Can't really trust what Hamas said. Hamas says we don't have 40 women, children, elderly, sick to get back that are alive. So the short answer, I guess, is we don't know, but it's certainly more unfortunate than the 34. Some have been killed, I'm sure, in the fighting, some have been executed, some were taken in very, they were bleeding and they were missing. You saw videos, so I'm sure that contributed to that as well. Where do the talks stand? I'm really much less optimistic on there being a deal than the headlines. I think Hamas has every reason to wait, right? The more they wait, the more, the better position they're in. They see that countries are calling for ceasefire without the release of the hostages. The more they wait, there's more domestic fighting in Israel. I think, and the deal keeps getting better and better for them. I think the way that the world is going about this, especially the U.S., is undermining Israel's leverage. At the same time, a ceasefire is at the center of America's plans for the region. There has to be a ceasefire to end the fighting in the north. And once you end the fighting in the north, then you can start focusing on a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia and a Palestinian state. All these things have to come into place, but nothing happens without a ceasefire. And all of this has to happen soon, because otherwise the Americans will be close to an election. So Israel is really, the U.S. is really leaning into that. So I wish I could say something a bit more positive about the hostages. I don't think there's going to be many more operations that rescue them. There's only been 3 hostages rescued in operations, military operations, and usually those things don't work. So I think there shouldn't be that expectation. If it works, great, but that's not something to bank on. The humanitarian aid. I've been critical of the Israeli government not because they've violated laws about that, but because they should have realized that humanitarian aid would become an issue that gets in the way of the fighting. And what's happened is they've said no. 2 days after October 7th, Yoav Gallant said Gaza's under total siege, there'll be no fuel, electricity, water, food going in, and 2 weeks later, they start opening up. They said, we're not going to open Kerem Shalom, and then they open Kerem Shalom. They said, we're not going to open Ashdod Port, we're not going to open a crossing in northern Gaza. All these things happen. Why not get ahead of the ball and be seen as the ones that are pushing it? Netanyahu has been frustrated for a couple months now, but he still hasn't been that vocal about it because the right-wing coalition doesn't like the aid going in, especially when there's nothing going to the hostages.
Well, why are they calling it humanitarian aid? Why don't they call it terrorist aid? Because that's what it is. Because once it gets in there, there's no way, they don't control the distribution.
We'll talk about it after, okay? But let me finish here. As of now, there's certainly more truckloads of food going in than there were before the war. You hear about 500 truckloads going in before the war. That wasn't food. That was all sorts of stuff. That was building materials. We know where that went. It was something like 70-something a day before the war. And now, I think today, if I remember, it was 350 truckloads went into Kerem Shalom, 150 went through Nitzana, and then Egypt into Rafah. The American ship is supposed to be there, I think, on the 28th, and then it'll take a while to start building it. But that's not going to be that much. The airdrops are really just a way for countries to show that they are being involved, but every airdrop is like 1 to 2 truckloads. The Erez crossing into northern Gaza is not open yet, and they're not going to do it at Erez, they'll do it kind of near the beach. And there's a crossing that they've opened into the north near Beirut. In general, Israel's doing what the world has demanded, obviously in circumstances that they see as being forced to do it. I think that Netanyahu should appoint someone to be in charge of the humanitarian effort, like he appointed someone in charge of the hostage issue. I think that should certainly be done, and there's also 3 water lines running from Israel to the Gaza Strip, which people don't talk about much about. So a lot is being done. I think the final thing that should be done is that in 2014, Israel built an Israeli field hospital on the Gaza-Israel border. No one really went to it because Hamas kept people from doing it, but I think if Israel did that as well, I think it would go a long way to alleviate some of the criticism and help us get to the fix.
I want to thank Lazar for your incredible insight and knowledge. Thank you really for sharing all your insights and knowledge. We can learn it all from you, and thank you for your service to the town and for all of us. Thanks to all of our partners. Thanks to all of the media.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. I'm just going to end the